My name is Leora Vance. I've survived my family by becoming a shadow in my own bloodline. But that night, a single, clipped message from my mother pulled me straight back into the orbit I'd fought to escape. Marcella Vance, 8 p.m., Sky Garden, mandatory, dress appropriately. No greeting, no how are you, just an order. In the Vance family, mandatory means if you don't show up, Dominic, my father will find a legal loophole to erase you from the will. I had just finished a 12-hour shift in the robotics lab, my engineer's jumpsuit still dusted with metal shavings. I should have gone home to my tiny apartment, eaten instant noodles, and pretended the Vances didn't exist. But skipping this invitation was the fastest way to financial and social execution. The pressure-sealed elevator rocketed toward the 110th floor of the Vance Tower. My pulse thudded in rhythm with the cables humming above me. Glass walls gave me a 360 degrees view of New Cascadia in 2048, neon veins snaking through the city, security drones gliding like hawks in the humid night air. The doors slid open to the Sky Garden, a suspended oasis between steel and clouds. A glass dome arched overhead, trees glowing under LED light, tables draped in white silk, champagne towers catching the glint of drone cameras broadcasting the charity gala to millions. And there she was. Selene Vance, my older sister, center stage in a silver satin gown, champagne flute in hand, her smile polished sharp enough to cut. Her eyes swept over my last-minute black dress, assessing, calculating. That smile, I knew it. It wasn't welcome. It was a warning. Selene lifted her glass toward me like a toast, but her lips moved just enough for me to read the words. Tonight's going to be fun. I swallowed hard, because in the Vance family, fun always came at my expense, usually in blood, sometimes in bone. I tried to blend into the crowd, an impossible task in a place designed to be watched. Sky Garden smelled like imported orchids and overpriced champagne. Waiters floated by with trays of sea glass oysters and glowing cocktails. Above, drones hovered silently, their lenses drinking in every carefully staged angle of the Vance family's perfection. Dominic, my father, stood near the main table, hands clasped behind his back like a general inspecting troops. Every smile he gave was for the cameras. Every nod was calculated for the donors. My mother, Marcella, was draped in crimson silk, her wine glass an accessory she never put down. Then, like a spotlight, Selene's voice cut through the hum of polite chatter. Well, look who finally made it. Every head turned. Her silver gown shimmered under the dome lights, and the little smirk at the corner of her mouth told me she wasn't just greeting me, she was baiting me. Still wearing the engineer special, huh? She teased, eyes flicking over my dress. A ripple of polite laughter followed, some genuine, some just afraid not to join in. I forced a smile. Nice to see you too, Selene. I took a step toward the bar, hoping to vanish into the background, but her heels clicked after me. She lowered her voice just enough so only the closest guests could hear. You should thank me, Leora. At least you're entertaining tonight. I stopped cold. Selene, don't. Her smile widened. Come on, let's show them the old Vance sisters' trick. Before I could move, her manicured fingers clamped around my wrist. The twist came fast, so fast I barely had time to gasp. A bolt of white-hot pain shot up my arm, locking my breath in my chest. Selene, stop! I hissed, but she turned to face the crowd, still gripping my wrist like a trophy. So sensitive as always. She sang out, her voice light and playful, like this was just some harmless childhood game. From the corner of my eye, I saw Dominic lean against the banquet table, clapping once like he was at a prize fight. She needed that, he chuckled. Might teach her not to talk back. The pain was spreading, sharp, pulsing, radiating through my fingers until they felt foreign heavy. I tried to pull free, but Seleni's grip only tightened, her nails biting into my skin. Guests around us laughed nervously, their eyes flicking between us and the hovering camera drones. And then I saw it, my mother, lounging in her chair, swirling her wine, eyes half-lidded with quiet satisfaction. She didn't even bother to look at me when she said, "Useless girl, always making trouble." My stomach turned. I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek, willing myself not to cry, not here, not in front of them. But something was wrong. My fingers, they wouldn't move. The crowd kept laughing. Selene kept smiling. And I realized this wasn't a game. The pain was blurring my vision now. Every heartbeat felt like it was pounding through my wrist, each throb louder than the nervous laughter around me. I tried to flex my fingers. Nothing. Selene's grip loosened, but only so she could flick her hair back like she just finished a magic trick. "See, she's fine," she told the nearest guests, her voice dripping with mock sweetness, but I wasn't fine. A cold panic was settling in my chest, heavier than the heat of the garden lights. That's when I saw her. Across the room, a woman I didn't recognize stood frozen, a half-finished plate in her hand. She wasn't laughing. She wasn't filming. She was staring at my hand. She moved fast. The plate clinked onto a nearby table as she crossed the space between us in a few determined strides. "Wait! Stop!" she said, her voice cutting through the music and chatter like a blade. Selene's head snapped toward her, brows lifting in mock offense. "Excuse me, we're just playing." "No," the woman interrupted, crouching beside me. Her eyes scanned my swollen wrist, her movements steady and clinical. "This isn't a game. Look at her hand. She needs medical attention." For the first time all night, the laughter stalled. A few guests glanced at each other, unsure whether to keep smiling for the cameras or admit they'd just been watching something ugly. From behind, my father's voice boomed, irritated. "She's fine. Always pulls this kind of stunt. Walk it off, Leora." The woman didn't even look at him. She straightened, pulling a sleek phone from her pocket. "Someone needs to call emergency services." My pulse spiked, not from fear of the injury, but from the shock of anyone taking my side. A hush spread through the crowd. The guests who had been recording suddenly lowered their phones. The drones hovered awkwardly, unsure where to point. "Put the cameras down," she told the onlookers. "Call 911. Now." Her tone wasn't loud, but it carried. A kind of authority that didn't need volume to make people move. And just like that, the Sky Garden didn't feel like a party anymore. It felt like a crime scene. By the time the medevac drone ferried me to New Cascadia General's rooftop landing pad, the pain had settled into something deeper, like my bones themselves were vibrating. My wrist was immobilized in a sleek carbon brace, but even the stabilizer couldn't block the sharp pulses that shot up my arm. Inside the ER, the lights were a harsh, sterile white. Monitors hummed. Footsteps echoed. I was wheeled into an exam bay, and for the first time in years, I wasn't surrounded by family. Just the quiet urgency of professionals who didn't look at me like I was an inconvenience. The woman from the party stepped in beside the bed, introducing herself. "Dr. Imani Cross," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm going to stay until they've run every test." Before I could answer, the curtain jerked open. Dominic strode in like he owned the place, Marcella right behind him, heels clicking like a metronome of disapproval. "She doesn't need all this," Dominic barked. "She's fine. She always bounces back." "This is wasting everyone's time," Marcella added, rolling her eyes as if she were watching a child fake a fever. "Doctor," Cross didn't flinch. "Step aside," she said, her tone as sharp as a scalpel. "You're not qualified to make that call." Minutes later, the tech wheeled me into the MRI suite. The machine's circular mouth glowed faintly, like it was waiting to swallow me whole. "Don't move," the technician instructed, and then the hum began, low, constant, thrumming through my bones. When it was over, I was rolled back to the bay. Imani stood at my side while two doctors entered. Dr. Kim from orthopedics and Dr. Alvarez, the trauma surgeon on call. Their expressions were measured but heavy. Dr. Kim pulled up the scans on a floating holo screen. "Here's the current fracture," she said, using a stylus to outline the clean break in my radius. "But that's not the whole picture." She swiped to the next image, zooming in. "These faint lines, see them? They're older fractures, untreated, multiple incidents, some are years old." My stomach dropped. I wasn't looking at just tonight's injury. I was looking at a timeline. My timeline etched into my skeleton. Dominic snorted. "She's always been clumsy. Fell off bikes, tripped over her own feet. That proves nothing." Marcella's arms folded tight. "She bruises like a peach. You're making a fuss over nothing." Dr. Alvarez turned to them, his voice level. "Old injuries, new injuries, same location, same pattern. This is not an accident." Detective Raul Vega appeared in the doorway, his badge catching the light. "When medical evidence suggests repeated assault, it becomes my case, whether you like it or not." For a long moment, no one spoke. The scans glowed behind him, impossible to argue with, impossible to unsee. And for the first time in my life, I felt the ground shift, not because my family had broken me again, but because the truth was finally standing in the room with me. By morning, the Sky Garden incident was already circling the city's news feeds. Clips had leaked, fuzzy, cropped videos of Selini's grip on my wrist, my face twisting in pain. The headlines were cautious, but the comments were vicious. "Attention seeker," "Drama queen," "Typical Vance scandal." Detective Vega arrived at the hospital just after sunrise with a manila folder under his arm. He didn't get 2 words out before the door swung open. Selini walked in first. She looked like she just stepped off a runway, hair perfect, silk suit the color of fresh steel. Behind her came Dominic, broad-shouldered and seething, and Marcella, her expression carved into an immaculate mask of disdain. Selini didn't sit. She simply dropped a folder onto the table with a sharp thud. "Before you embarrass yourself with whatever story she's selling," she said to Vega, "you should read this." Inside were neatly typed psychiatric reports, medical notes, and sworn statements, each one painting me as unstable, prone to self-harm, desperate for attention. The paper smelled faintly of expensive ink and something colder, strategy. Dominic folded his arms. "She's been pulling stunts like this since she was a kid. The professionals agree." Marcella's voice was silky and cruel. "You know how many times we've had to clean up after her. This is what she does." For a moment, my throat closed. The old reflex, the one that whispered they're right, pressed hard against my ribs. Vega didn't bite. He closed the folder slowly, set it aside, and reached into his own case. "Interesting," he said evenly, "but none of this changes the medical imaging." He slid a holo projector across the table. With a tap, the air filled with the scans, fractures new and old, glowing in high-resolution detail. "These are not self-inflicted," Vega said, his voice steady. "And they show a history, multiple assaults." Selini's smirk flickered just for a second. Vega wasn't finished. He produced a slim silver data stick and handed it to the hospital's wall display. The screen lit up with crystal-clear footage from a drone's camera, Selini twisting my wrist under the Sky Garden lights, Dominic clapping, Marcella sipping wine as I doubled over. No edits. No blur. No room for doubt. The silence was thick. Even Selini's perfect posture sagged under the weight of it. Dominic's jaw worked like he was chewing on his own fury. Marcella's glassy composure cracked into something uglier fear. Vega turned to me. "Leora, I'm recommending charges, tonight." I could feel my heart hammering in my throat. Pressing charges meant a war I could never walk back from. It also meant I'd finally stop living under their shadow. Selini's voice broke the silence, low and venomous. You think a courtroom will care about your sob story? Viga didn't blink. They'll care when they see this, he said, gesturing to the footage still looping behind him. And for the first time in my life, I realized they were the ones cornered, not me. By nightfall, the Vance Tower no longer looked like a monument to power. It looked like a stage lit for ruin. Flashes of red and blue from the police drones painted the mirrored walls. Hovercams from every major news outlet circled above, broadcasting the scene live to the city's feeds. Neighbors from nearby towers lined their balconies, drinks in hand, watching the fall of the family they'd once called untouchable. Detective Viga stepped out of an armored transport and moved toward the glass front doors, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. I followed a few paces behind, my arm still strapped in the carbon brace. The night air tasted like rain and adrenaline. Before they could even knock, the doors hissed open. Dominic filled the doorway like a wall, his voice booming across the plaza. "You have no right to invade my home." Marcella swept in behind him, clutching a silk wrap around her shoulders, her voice pitched for the hovering cameras. "This is a witch hunt, our daughter, our own blood dragging us through the mud for attention." I stood silent, just inside the entrance, letting the cameras drink in every inch of the scene. Then Selene appeared. She didn't storm in. She glided, calm, deliberate, holding a slim black case. That smirk was back. "Detective," she said smoothly, "before you make a fool of yourself, you should see what my dear sister's been hiding." She placed the case on the table with a soft click. Inside were more printed records, fabricated incident reports, paid-off testimony, psychological assessments painting me as unstable. I could practically feel her victory swelling in the air. Viga leafed through the pages without changing expression. "Interesting," he said flatly, snapping the case shut. "But these don't erase an MRI." He nodded to an officer who produced a portable holoprojector. The footage lit up the air between us, Selene's hand locking around my wrist at the Sky Garden, the crowd's laughter, Dominic clapping, Marcella sipping wine as I winced in pain. The images looped, over and over, like an indictment you couldn't look away from. Gasps rippled through the crowd outside. Marcella's fingers trembled on the edge of her wrap. Dominic's face drained from red to a chalky gray. Selene's smirk collapsed entirely, her eyes darting from the footage to the officers moving in behind her. Viga's voice was calm, but it carried like a verdict. "Selene Vance, you're under arrest for aggravated assault." The magnetic cuffs locked around her wrists with a click that felt louder than the city itself. The sound silenced the crowd, silenced even the whir of the drones. Dominic lunged forward, shouting, "You've ruined everything, Leora." But this time, his words didn't pierce me. This time, they couldn't touch me at all. 2 years later, the echoes of that night still find me sometimes. But they sound different now, less like chains, more like distant thunder that can't touch me. The afternoon sun slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my apartment in the East Crescent district. The city buzzed far below, hovercars weaving between towers, gulls wheeling above the bay. On my coffee table sat a single, folded object, the hospital wristband from the night everything changed. I've never thrown it away. It isn't just plastic, it's proof I was seen, heard, believed. The door chimed. "Sierra, no," Dr. Imani Cross stepped in, balancing 2 coffees and a paper bag. "Still the same order, black, 2 sugars." She teased, I smiled. Some things don't change. We sat at the kitchen table, the city hum muffled behind thick glass. Her laughter was warm and easy, a sound I didn't realize I'd been missing my whole life. The kind of sound that comes from someone who doesn't want to see you hurt. When she left, I opened my terminal. Dozens of unread messages blinked on my patient advocacy group's platform. These days, I work at the Violence Intervention Network, helping people who have been dismissed, gaslighted, or told they are too sensitive. I walk them through filing reports, getting medical exams, connecting with legal aid. I tell them the same thing Imani told me that night. You're not overreacting. Don't let them convince you otherwise. Some nights I still wake up to the ghost of my father's voice, walk it off. Stop being a baby. When that happens, I get up, pour a glass of water, and touch the wristband, reminding myself it wasn't weakness. It was survival. That night in the Sky Garden didn't ruin me. It freed me. I start a new recording for the group's feed. My reflection stares back at me steadier now. No one should have to prove their pain with broken bones. If you've been told you're too sensitive, tell me your story. I promise I'll listen. I hit upload and close the terminal. The silence in my apartment isn't empty anymore. It's peace. Family should never mean fear. I wasn't weak. I wasn't dramatic. I was enough, and I always will be.